the very first day I met you was the same day that you were still grappling with what you felt would be, or what grappling with what is an appropriate publication of the Godsend Agenda.
Well, funny enough, the first time we met, you were at we were at Gamma,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd approached your booth. Actually, you kind of engaged me as I was walking past, so we started talking, and you showed me Sorcerer, and that was the first year that I had Godsend Agenda. That was my first not Gen Con, but Gamma. That was probably the real advent of me coming into the internet world and all that stuff. Because to me, it's like, okay, well, I play this game because it does this. I play this when it does this. Not everything needs to be this, but that was my thinking. But everyone else was, let's do D20. And I was like,
the generic romance is cyclical.
Right.
I mean, the first big one, the big one, and this is after everybody like published conversions in the backs of their games to each other. That was a thing for a while. But then the big one was GURPS, of course, 1986. GURPS was going to say, never need another game.
Right.
It does everything. And that same romance, then that romance crashes and burns because it can't and doesn't. And then, the next romance comes along sooner or later for the same thing. If that's it. And then people start talking about it like it's a feature. Well, you use the same rules for this and you use the same rules for that. And you're going, why is that a feature exactly?
Yep, exactly.
So the reason I bring this up at all is because we have to see whether this white whale can be captured usefully or whether it died long ago and is just stinking up a beach.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm romantic enough to say that no love game and design really needs to be considered in such a way. But on the other hand, let's go all the way back to the beginning and say, well, okay, God, I'm making no sense. 2 steps. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and see what the romance was. Right?
Okay.
You were a young mump, just a little mump back then, as were we all, and you had a dream. Okay, so let's think about that. And we are now ancient, grizzled, old, bitter, and other things. And so then the question is, what do we mean now by making a good game? So I guess the first question, going back to the beginning, is why, and then and then old, bitter, and grizzled, we start all over again with how.
Okay.
Right, because you said, I recall, you're saying you've kind of hit like a knot, right? It keeps going around and around. So that's why I'm being like so freaking psychological and abstract.
No, that's fine because maybe. I'm going to trust the process because
So let's take it back. It's 1997, right? The Prince song has not yet happened, and you are saying I have got to get this game designed. Another 2 weeks and I will have finished writing my role playing game. It will be done.
Right.
So what's the romance there? What's exciting about this?
Well, the thing was, originally, Godsend Agenda sprung out of my DC Heroes game. Basically, we had played a ton of DC Heroes. I had a ton of stuff. But then I'm like, well, okay, how can I make this fit together? But even before that, I had written a comic book for it. Or, a friend of mine, Jason Tondro, and I had, he was a roommate at a time. It's funny now because he works at Paizo. He does Paizo stuff.
And not only that, but I met Jason. We did the first year comics together. So I know.
Yeah, well, see, there you go.
Right.
Yeah, so we used to be roommates.
All the way back to roommates. Oh my God. All right, then go ahead.
Yeah, well, I've known him since the beginning of the 90s. We were roommates, play champions, we get tons of champions together. He was a huge champions guy. So, written a comic book at the time. There was a lot of .coms. .coms that basically were blowing up everywhere. There was one that was like, hey, we're producing all sorts of media. So I get in touch with them. I'm like, hey, I've got this comic book. They're like, that's great. Let's do your comic book. I'm like, that is fantastic. Do you have any other stuff to go along with it? I'm like, I got a role-playing game. And they're like, all right, get us the role-playing game too. We're going to publish everything. So then I'm like, ooh, I got to write a role-playing game, right? So then I set out and I write Godsend Agenda. .com, like everything, the bubble blew up. Everyone disappeared. So now I'm left with this game, and I think this is like 2000 or something like that. And then it's like, okay, well, I've got this game here. I guess I should just publish it. So then I set out to publish it. Because I had published stuff before. I had published comic books before, like indie comics back in the early 90s. So it was just another weird leap. It was like, okay, let me figure out distribution, figure out all this stuff, publish the game. When you look at the first version of that game, which I think you have, it's the one which is the gold scarab on the cover. So with that one was pretty meat and potatoes. And I used the tools that I had available at the time, or the tools as I understood them. So the game is, really don't even want to say traditional, because it's just it is a game. It is the version of like my design concepts and sensibilities at the time. Mm-hmm. Second edition comes along. I run into the guys who run West End Games now, decide to do it as a D6 game. Do that, and it becomes a little bit more refined. Then I go on and I do Hellas, and then I do Atlantis. And, so it's been 18 years since I first released Godsend Agenda. But now, and all during that time, basically, one of like the key things that I've always wanted to do in my games, in any game that I run, is that you are the one that's, you're the catalyst. You're the thing that changes the world. You're not in someone's game.
Right.
The game is you. And I've played in those games where, especially like I had a friend, we game together, and he'll run like, let's say, Game of Thrones. And you are a co-star. You're an extra in this Game of Thrones game.
No, I'm familiar.
Or if they run Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's like you are an extra. You don't get to do all the awesome stuff because the world's already written. To me, it's like, well, to me, this is just a guideline. We could do whatever we want, but it just blows people's minds.
An interesting thing, though, because I'm looking through your old stuff and I'm looking through your new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at a few things. I'm not going to go through all of them, but that I've been, leafing through Hellas over and over again, saying, right. When I get the chance, I'm playing this one. And one of the interesting things that's in it is that even given all the setting history and even given all the settings, large entities, clashes, and concerns, gameplay doesn't care. Gameplay wants to know what becomes of you, and gameplay wants to know what tremendous force for what you may become.
Right.
Yep. Now that's true. Now with Godsend Agenda, there's a lot of freaking gears, wheels, parts.
Yes.
Okay. We have and the fact that it began as a played thing, and then you said, okay, well, we played this, now I can turn this around and make it a game. There is a curse built into that.
Yes.
And you see the curse most definitely with Aaron Alston's Strike Force.
Okay.
Because the original Strike Force, published way back in 1987, the publication was 87, but the gameplay it's based on was super early Champions, maybe even the part of it before the original game was published, right? And so the point is that you can tell by reading that publication, and one of the reasons I cite it all the time, it's very clear that what happens in it is a product of play. And there's stuff they threw in, and he says it outright. He says, okay, well, we did these arcs and I didn't know what to do next. So I just borrowed from this comic and threw it in, and saw what they did with that.
Right.
And it's very clear that it's a very piecemeal built, expanding setting, right? And everyone calls it the Strike Force campaign. And it's completely inaccurate to call it that in the role-playing sense of I'll take you through the campaign, right? I mean, the campaign's laid out. Right. It's effectively planned, and in this game they had character arcs that were very emergent. They had fates for adversaries that they didn't know were going to happen. And then that's fun. So it's really apparent in that early publication, this fact that the story is left in the wake of play. You only get plot by looking at what play is left behind. Right? That's the plot. Right. Whatever play left behind, that's the plot. And so then you go and you look at the modern publication of Strike Force, Aaron Alston's Strike Force, published posthumously. And right. What do you see? You see a goddamn source book of this brilliant Swiss watch of an expansive setting that you now get to run around in. Right. You see it as a fixed entity. A complete, every detail is on a par with every other detail. There's no admission that this was made up 52 sessions into play. There's right. no thought of, well, then this character changed because the player just threw the points in this direction and wanted to change these things about the character as they went along. That's not there. It's a sterile, static artifact. Right. So when I look at Godsend Agenda and I see all these things, we've got the concept of the agenda that this alien race uses to subjugate planets. Right. And then we've thrown in the twist that this is not a standard colonization. This is a prison ship from that culture. Yes. And they're on their own here, and they've just decided to use the same techniques to keep themselves, comfortable. And because they're a bunch of psycho criminal types, they're basically, now we have capitalism. Okay. Right. So you got that. And then you have, as if that weren't enough. Now, because we could just stop right there and say, no superpowers, that's the setting, let's go. Yes. Right? We could do it. That's a solid chunk of content right there. And then we have superpowers. And then we have a variety of factions or origins. You call them species in there, but it's kind of like origin, right? It's the, they got the Black October, who are the coolest. You've got the the alien people, the Chimerans. You've got the Atlanteans. Got to have Atlanteans in there for some reason. And that's my one thing, because throughout any game that I write, I'll default to some Atlanteans. I'm like, damn it, they're here again. Yeah, I'm kind of glad you said that, because I was trying not to. But no, they're in everything, and it's right. So funny that. But when I look at all the sources that I'm pulling from. Mm-hmm. The Atlanteans are always kind of like the locus of all of this stuff. Well, that said, let's take a look, though, because if you were to have a bunch of superpowered characters and we're just going to leave all the origin and all the context out of it and say, what are they going to make of society? And you specifically saying in the Godsend Agenda that, no, we are not talking about law enforcement and DC Comics right. 1961. We are talking about, whatever Steve Gerber and Steve Englehart would have made of it if somebody hadn't stopped them in 1971, right? And so we have no idea. I mean, where was Steve Gerber going with Omega, which was basically right. his Superman that he never got to finish. He wrote like 5 issues. We don't know. Or what if Bill Mantlo hadn't been stopped from doing Wood God, Marvel Comics where Wood God and Omega were the main characters. Right. And Adam, you and this Wood God. You love this Wood God. I do. Wood God, Adam Warlock, Omega the Unknown. Who knows what? Or if you want to be more romantic, what if Kirby had, not basically. Well, we could talk about that. But the point is, what if Kirby had a huge brainwave and just was able to suddenly make the fourth world, amazing and do whatever he wanted it indefinitely, in 1977. But the point is that that's the kind of superpower you're talking about, that role with the world.